So with the presentation of Richard Jansen, we ended our second slot of the morning section, which was entirely focused on marine hull underwriting claims and the relationship between loss prevention and decision taken by the marine hull underwriters. The third slot is entirely focused on piracy. Last year, we concluded our piracy session by saying that let's hope next year not to be talking about piracy again, but piracy is still there, most probably not to the extent that it used to be until last year. Certainly, has declined quite heavily in the last few months. And we have the privilege of having with us a lawyer from Ince & Co., actually a partner from Ince & Co., Stephen Askins, that is very well known to be very much on the forefront on this very delicate issue. I had the chance to cooperate with him on a case, and I have to say that I learned many, many things, and I hope he will tell us something briefly about piracy in his speech. Thank you very much.
How long have I got? How long have I got?
10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Good morning. It's on. Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to speak at such austere location such as this. Fantastic place to have a conference. I've got 10 minutes, I think, to give you a brief overview on piracy as it is, or as a personal view as I see it at the moment. The big news in the UK at the moment is that we have just arrested the first person for piracy. Unfortunately, it was a woman who had been eating some poisonous plant and jumped on a local ferry running around saying, "I'm Jack Sparrow, I've hijacked a vessel." But it does give me an excuse to put up a picture of Johnny Depp. I was very impressed the other day to find out that I'm not only the same age, but I share a birthday with Johnny Depp. And I was proudly telling my wife this. She said yes, but the resemblance stops there, which I thought was particularly harsh. I'm going to start very briefly with West Africa. West Africa is becoming a real concern and problem. And in fact, we have just been involved over the last 48 hours with a vessel which was hijacked off the West Africa coast. But we are beginning to see a pattern now and draw some very clear distinctions between the Nigerian pirate and the Somali pirate. But what's also interesting is the way that owners are using best management practice, picking up on some of the generic rules and guidelines in there and applying them in the West African situation. So we're seeing vessels being hardened, and we're seeing, in the case of the Energy Centurion, owners and crew using citadels to help them, and that led to an intervention by the Nigerian Navy, which allowed the crew of the Abu Dhabi Star at the beginning of September to be released. So the Gulf of Guinea is becoming a real issue, with vessels being targeted, generally oil-carrying vessels, where the Nigerian pirate is really intent on stealing that cargo, taking it ashore, and selling it. It is not a protracted negotiation as we're seeing off the coast of Somalia. The most significant thing about the hijacking on Saturday, Sunday was the fact that it took place just outside Abidjan off the Ivory Coast. Now, that is some 320 miles west of the most westerly attack that the Nigerian gangs had done before. And I think this will send a real tremor through the war risk underwriting market if this is now a sign of things to come. And this shows the breadth of the Nigerian pirate operating well outside what are already designated additional premium areas. And as we can see from this busy little slide, unlike the Somali pirates, this is much more targeted, and they are much more interested in simply taking product carriers and refined products. This is my wavy chart. It shows from the same source of information a developing pattern over the last few years of the Somali pirates. So blue is 08, red is 09, pink is 10, the green line is last year, and you can see the orange line, which, as we know, is trending well below even 2008 levels of activity, which is a good thing, probably down to naval intervention, much more aggressive posture against Indian dhows and motherships. And I think what will be interesting over the next 2 or 3 months is to see whether or not the Somali pirate still has the capability in terms of range of operating as far offshore as we've seen in the last couple of years. I anticipate that there will be activity in the Arabian Sea, but I do wonder whether they've still got the capability to be operating as close to India as they did over the past 2 years. But as you can see, we're about to move into a period of higher activity, and we can expect, I think, increased activity over the next few months, but let's hope that the level of hijackings remains significantly lower. I think we also need to remember that the rolling average, if you look at the last 6 ships that have been released, is now over 250 days. There is a real human price being paid by the crew who are being held even as we sit here today. And there is, it seems to me, a real conundrum and paradox at the center of this, a conflict at the center of the negotiating process that I'm not sure that general average is flexible enough to deal with this situation. And I think it's one of the things the industry is going to need to consider if this continues. And what I mean by that is really, when you think about it, for a hull and cargo underwriter who bear the main cost of paying the ransom, the longer that goes on, the less that ransom becomes. And there is no way of sharing the benefits, and those people who have risk of time generally do not contribute to the ransom pot. And that causes, it seems to me, some real anomalies, particularly when you look at these 2 vessels. One is the Savina Kalin and one is the Zirku. Now, this just illustrates what is sort of going on out there, and one of the things that we haven't really got a grip of is that these both are Aframax tankers. They're 80,000 tons. They were carrying exactly the same cargo. They were pretty much caught by the same gang in terms of its profile. And yet one vessel was held for 75 days and one vessel was held for 330 days. And it seems to me that the ship-owning community is separated into 3 distinct categories. There are those people who can't pay, and that is often because the expectation of the pirates exceeds the value of the vessel. So we have vessels like the Iceberg, which has now been held for over 2.5 years, the crew of the Leopard, who've now been held for nearly 2 years. 18 months of that has been held ashore. There is no safety net in the industry to recover the crew that have been held all this time. There are those owners who won't pay, who decide that negotiation and hard negotiation is the way forward, and that increasingly means hijackings over 6, 7, 8 months. That in turn means that we're going to see greater mistreatment of crew. And there are those owners who take a pragmatic approach and look for ways to pay perhaps quicker if that's possible. And that's why we see vessels sometimes getting out in very relatively small time, and some which don't. You have a strategy of target or you have a strategy of price. But the industry, as an industry, has never discussed the best way to approach negotiation. Masses and masses of attention on armed guards and the accreditation of those, but very little consideration and serious thought going into this side of it. So the Smyrni hijacked in May. The statistics will tell us that it hasn't been released in the first couple of months, and it's likely to be there statistically for 7 or 8 months. Are they pirates? Some interesting things coming out in the law, because the definition of piracy, and I don't want to get bogged down, and nor do I have time to do so, looks at illegal acts, private ends on the high seas. And so we have cases like this where the Israeli state attacked a vessel at sea, and some commentators said, well, this is piracy by a state. But of course, you can't have piracy by a state because it's not for private ends. The Fair Cambogi, not on the high seas, attacked as it was just off the coast of Oman. And a case very much at the center of the Italian industry, of course, the Enrique Lexi. And very interestingly and significantly, what happened at the beginning of that case is the Indians relied on a convention called the Sewer Convention, which is an anti-terrorist convention, in order to consider charging those two officers or those two soldiers, because their actions, said to be an act of violence against a person on a vessel, fitted in with the definition of a SIR convention. An extraordinary muddle that the international community has got itself in, that two soldiers placed on board a vessel can be charged with an anti-terrorist offence, although that has gone away. There is going to be a big issue in the Indian court as to who has jurisdiction. And let me tell you, as a matter of international law, there is no doubt that both Italy and India do have jurisdiction to try this vessel, whether they decide that they're going to hold on to jurisdiction and decide that there's a diplomatic way out of this, we'll see in the next few weeks. And I think this will then come down to a case of whether those soldiers are entitled to rely on state immunity to avoid prosecution. It's going to be an interesting case. In terms of ransoms, on an international level, David Cameron got up in April at a conference in London and said he thought he would like to ban the payment of ransoms. There's now an international task force. I'm part of an industry panel trying to lobby that international task force and explain why banning ransoms is not the way forward. I know that Italy has a law which bans ransoms in the terms of kidnapping, but we all know that where Italian vessels have been hijacked, that ways are found to pay the ransom, and that remains the only viable way of really ensuring that crews are released. So again, that international task force is due to report in a month or so, and we'll be seeing what recommendations it makes. I know that the next speaker is going to talk about armed guards, and I'm not going to dwell on this for too long. Again, at an international level, accreditation is the big buzzword. We're being pushed down the ISO line 28007. I actually have some serious misgivings about this. I wonder whether this is going to keep quality at a high level. And again, my concern is that what will happen is that the auditors of the ISO system will be of different standards in different parts of the world. But if a Philippine company can say that it's ISO accredited, then a ship owner is instinctively simply going to say, that is the international standard, I don't have to look behind that. And I do fear that we're going to be moving away from quality if we're not very, very careful about how we impose this international accreditation system. And I do wonder whether some of the international countries will follow that. And the other thing which is causing real problems at the moment in the international community is floating armories. This is a photograph of one of those floating armories. You can see weapons, and we're talking large number of weapons just left on deck. Sri Lanka this week have said that all weapons are to be taken off Sri Lanka and put on a small tug offshore. That tug was arrested by the UAE last weekend, and I'm still not sure whether it's been released. But there is a real mess out there because, again, the international community does not know how to deal with the concept of floating armories and the whole issue of how you approve these, secure these, and make it possible for maritime security companies to use them. So a real problem. GuardCon is going to be addressed by Chris South, so I don't have to talk about that. And I've done it, just over 10 minutes. Mauro.
Well done. Well done. Congratulations.